On Writing, a memoir of the craft. Your uncle letting you know to XYZ, examine your zipper, in a gruff voice so you don't embarrass yourself at your family dinner out on the town. Okay, so On Writing is a memoir. It's a little bit instructional, a little bit of a text. Written by the great Stephen King. It was published in 2000. It is uncensored, soft, helpful, direct, and genuine. There's no spoilers here at all, so don't worry about that. It's a fantastic book. I just finished it last night. I will get into the nitty-gritty of some differences possibly between editions, and we'll discuss that. But yeah, it's great. So it says it is a memoir of the craft. Sorry, a memoir of the craft. It's hard to think of Stephen King as anything else other than a writer. So he felt, and just like I think most people would feel, it was necessary to talk about him and his backstory and history a bit in order to discuss how and why he writes. So there's two very distinct parts of this book. I mean, there's a third and kind of a fourth as well, which we'll get into. But there's the backstory of him and why he was, or how he came to write. And then there's a part about this is how to write. This is how I came to be a writer and why I love writing and my story of how I ended up where I am. And this is how to do it. Then there's a third part that is a postscript that is about more of the present, like right before publication, because some big things happened in his life. And he's a little bit about that there, but it is more just, again, about him. But then after that, in the formatting here, it's like the fourth section of the book that's only a couple pages, and it's weird. I wish that they didn't do that. But it basically discusses more instructional textbook style stuff of like, this is how I would edit this passage. Here are my notes on how to edit this passage, which I think should have been included in part 2 of the book. If we talk about the book in 4 distinct sections, we should have really just had part 1, 2, and 3. Part 1, this is my backstory on me and how I got into writing, and this is how, part 2, this is how to write. That's where that should have gone. The edits and notes that he would make on a passage. And then part 3, just like, hey, this is my life right now. This big thing just happened. And it should have ended there. And it would have ended wonderfully. But it did not. So, I mentioned it being uncensored yet soft. So, part of what I love about this book is just how he's very direct. And he says things with love because he loves writing so much, and he is very adamant about some things that aren't not just opinions. He believes them to be factual and it's right or wrong. He's saying, if you are like this, don't write. If you are trying to do this, don't bother. Because he just loves the craft. He loves the art so much and what it's given him and what I think in turn he has given the art. But so I like that directness from him a lot. And again, that uncensored. He talks about, too, just like, write what you're going to write. Tell the story you're going to tell. And don't bother thinking about trying to get the widest audience or whatever else. And he is so colloquial in his language that shows through a lot. But there is a softness to him as well, especially when he talks about his wife and their relationship. That shows through, and that's kind of just like some nice insight and just shows more of his character as a person than I had really known. I love Stephen King, and I would say that he is my favorite author. Part of it, though, is the availability of his books. But he's just a fantastic, amazing author as well. But the availability of them, I mean, being like how popular they are, but how many he's written, and thus how many are able to be read. Someone like Jeffrey Eugenides has only written 3 novels, I've read two of them. One of them is one of my favorite novels, period, The Virgin Suicides, and I had read Middlesex as well, and I'd like to read The Marriage Plot, but if those three books were all top shelf, and then Stephen King books, some of them are top shelf for me, some of them are not, maybe I could say that he's my favorite author, but that wasn't the case for Jeffrey either. Anyway, doesn't matter. So it was nice to gain a little bit of insight into Stephen King because I hadn't really read any interviews or watched anything really. I don't know why. I just never came upon them naturally and never went out of my way to just be like, oh, let's look up some Stephen King interviews and stuff. And there were some things that he is so candid in other things that I have seen, articles or whatever, where someone's quoted a tweet and they've written a whole article about it. But I mean, there are things where he has a sense of humor, he is very candid, and he doesn't care. But he also is in a financial position where he doesn't have to, but I think that's genuinely him, and has been for a long time. He doesn't care to cater to anyone else, and that comes off here as well. Who should read this book? I think if you love Stephen King, if you are a fan of his words, but you're not a writer, I think you would still get a lot out of reading that first and third part of this book. I think you would really enjoy it. If you aspire to be a writer, or you are a writer, and you don't like Stephen King, I think you would still get a lot out of that second part of the book, where he tells you, this is how you should write. I don't take everything he says as gospel. There's things in there that I would do differently, and there's things he acknowledges, like, hey, this is just how I do it, and that's it. But there are some things in there that are incredibly helpful for, I think, anyone writing anything, that I think should be gospel. That should be like, this is how it's done, this is it. This isn't an opinion, this is how it needs to be done, and if you don't agree, well, then you're not doing it right. I think that's in there too. So if you don't like Stephen King, but you want to be a better writer, read this. If you aren't a writer, but you really like Stephen King and want to know more about his life, read this. If you are both, coincidentally, which I would say I am, then I think you will get even more out of it. Because I love Stephen King, and recently, part of why I chose to read this now is because I'm starting a kind of different writing journey and want to try my hand at writing fiction, which isn't something I've really done much of before, and want to take it a little more seriously in my endeavor. So I got a lot out of it. I think that the formatting is super weird. I think there's a 20th anniversary edition of this book that I have that was gifted to me, and I would like to see, because there's some extras in there from some other people in his life that contributed to that. So I would like to read that and see, not the whole thing again right away, but I would like to just go and see what those differences are there. Because the formatting of this is just kind of what turned me off at the end. I was like, why is this over here? Like, you had this nice, soft way of showing us the exit and getting us on our journey of writing, and then you're like, oh, hey, by the way, come back in here. Come back in my office for a second. I'm going to show you exactly how to do this. And then it became very instructional and academic again. And I was like, we passed that part. Like, we did that already. That should have been over there. And maybe I'm just being really picky, but it kind of matters. Is it important? I would say if you plan to do any writing and want to be good at it, it's important. I think that this is a great book for writers. I think that it's an important book for those who wish to write. If you are just interested in the craft of writing as a fan, and you like it's just a fan of writing and what people can do and how they do it, and you don't want to write, I guess you would still get a lot out of it in that aspect, in that section as well. It is high on my shelf. It is not quite top shelf, but part of that reason, for me, top shelf has to be pretty darn perfect. And that formatting at the end there is weird. If it wasn't for that, I think it would be top shelf. It's also just a very different book, a memoir with some instructional stuff. I think to be even more top shelf, I would like a real legit memoir of Stephen King, by Stephen King, because I think he has that ability. I don't think he has much interest in doing that. He kind of just gave you backstory because it was necessary, but I don't know if he really likes to write about himself in that aspect that much, but I would find it incredibly interesting, and I like the way he writes about himself. So, More of the memoir, less of the weird formatting and the academics at the end. That could have been placed in the middle where it should have been. And then I think it would be top shelf for me. But it's incredibly high on the shelf. I think this is a book that I will read. If I keep writing, I think I could read this every year or two for a while. Because there's things in here that I'm going to forget about that will give me reminders on, like, until I get into a rhythm. I couldn't step back in and read it right away again. And maybe I would just skip to the more academic parts of it. But they don't read as a textbook. What is the other thing that makes this so great? It doesn't read as a textbook, even though they get academic and instructional, because he's just saying it in this way that he has, that it's not dry at all. That's all I really have to say. Stephen King, a memoir on writing, a memoir of the craft. Fantastic read, quick read. It had a lot of great insight into him and his journey on how he became a writer, and I would like to know more about Stephen King, but this might be all we ever get.